body and grinding down the center.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, it has been announced that Terry Harper is going to be taking on former WBO featherweight champion Heather Hardy in the lightweight division. Both Terry Harper and Heather Hardy have since made the decision they're going to campaign as lightweights moving forward. Heather Hardy having already fought Jessica Kamara there last year.
She lost that fight.
This is set to go down March 12th on the undercard of Leigh Wood versus Mick Conlon.
I like Terry to win a fight.
Heather Hardy has already fought as a lightweight once before against Jessica Kamara. She has since made her lightweight debut, and she didn't look good up there, you know. Heather Hardy wasn't a big puncher in the featherweight division. She was a volume puncher, a busy puncher, a prolific puncher that's not afraid to let the fists fly, but she never had concussive power as a featherweight, and I sincerely doubt that she will have considerably more power as a lightweight, based on
how she looked against Jessica Kamara.
Terry Harper is a naturally bigger fighter than Heather Hardy with a bigger frame more adequately suited to carry the added weight.
Because Terry's got a bigger frame, she might feel more invigorated as a lightweight.
Not as drained, not as depleted, cutting all the way down to 130 pounds. She won't have to cut the extra 5.
Might see an even stronger Terry Harper.
She's 15 years younger than Heather Hardy. Terry Harper's 25 years old to Heather, who's a very vivacious 40 years old. Tough customer, about as tough as they come, though I don't like her chances in this fight. Terry Harper doesn't necessarily come from a very deep amateur background, but having seen both fighters in action for as long as I have, I can say Terry Harper has better form, a better jab.
Sets up her power shots better.
With that jab, with that lead hand, than Heather Hardy does. Heather
throws a lot of arm punches.
Heather Hardy, who isn't as much of a jabber as Terry Harper is. Heather, who likes to flurry.
Yeah, she's prolific.
She throws a lot of punches, but she often sacrifices defense for offense. In doing so, there are several holes there that a young, statuesque fighter like a Terry Harper can exploit in this situation. Terry being the longer fighter in the fight, with the longer legs, longer strides, it's going to be up to Heather to close that gap if she wants to land anything, and she's going to have to get past Terry Harper's jab.
Heather's coming off of 2 back-to-back losses, one to Amanda Serrano and another to Jessica Kamara.
Terry Harper's coming off that knockout loss to Alicia Baumgartner, so in that way, both fighters have some rebounding to do. That's what makes it a bit of an even situation, a bit of an even contest, though I always say there's more to boxing than what you see on paper.
They're both coming off of losses, and they both want to rebound off those losses.
The logical prediction is Terry Harper, and the conservative prediction would have to be Terry Harper on points. Heather Hardy, she's never been knocked out.
Not as a featherweight, not as a lightweight.
I get the sense they're trying to ease Terry back into activity, put her in there with someone interesting, someone who's going to make her work for it and give her something to have to work around, though Heather Hardy not being a very big puncher, Terry's not under much threat of being knocked out the way she was just knocked out by Alicia Baumgartner. I get the sense that this is a fight geared towards letting Terry get some rounds in the bank against somebody who's capable, to some degree, a capable fighter.
Though not necessarily a pure boxer.
Set to go down in the Nottingham Arena, Nottinghamshire in the United Kingdom on March
12th of March.
And with this fight in mind and what may take place beyond this fight, I don't see Terry fighting for a title for a while. I don't see Terry fighting for a title for a long time, because Katie Taylor still is this division's undisputed champion. And Katie Taylor, this April, towards the end of it, she's supposed to be fighting Amanda Serrano. Depending on what happens in that fight, if Katie Taylor wins and beats Amanda, well, I don't see Terry Harper fighting her this year.
If it happens the other way and Amanda beats Katie.
Well, I don't see Terry Harper fighting Amanda Serrano. If anything, Amanda Serrano might end up having a second fight, a rematch with Katie Taylor. You know how much Matchroom loves to employ those rematch clauses into their major fights, their major fighters, their contracts. If it happens the other way and Amanda beats Katie, I still don't think Amanda's going to be available for Terry to fight her.
No, I don't see Terry Harper fighting for a title at any point this year.
Though she might still get out there 2 to 3 times, go through the gears, soak her feet in the talent pool of the lightweight division. I don't see her contesting for any alphabet titles in the foreseeable future.
As far as this fight, I like it.
It's a nice decorative item for the undercard of Lee Wood versus Mick Conlan. I'm looking forward to that. Keep your eyes peeled for this in March on the 12th. In other news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, news broke yesterday by way of a tweet from Mike Coppinger and his sources. Shakur Stevenson and Oscar Valdez are in the process of finalizing a deal for a 130-pound title unification on April 30th. April 30th. That's the same day that Taylor versus Serrano is supposed to be going down in Las Vegas. There's no financial agreement yet, but sides are closing in on a pact for the ESPN main event. Story coming to ESPN. A few days ago, young Shakur Stevenson, by way of his social media, hinted that he was on the eve of something big, a very big fight, and here it is.
There were rumors and rumblings that Oscar was going to fight Emmanuel Navarrete.
But those rumors and rumblings have since gone quiet. Emmanuel Navarrete, not that long ago, stated that he had become a promotional free agent, and there is a discrepancy because then for promotions, his promotional outfit south of the border, they say the opposite. They say they have legal documentation that proves he's still under contract, and you wonder that didn't affect what could have been the Oscar Valdez fight. In any event, I'm pleased with this news. I view this as a better fight than that fight, because this fight, unlike that fight, involves 2 super featherweight champions with their O's intact.
They're both unbeaten fighters, both unbeaten champions.
This is the fight that Shakur Stevenson has been chasing for well over a year. He's been chasing it since before he moved up to the super featherweight division and became a champion there by way of unseating the then reigning champion, WBO champion, Jamel Semperfi Herring.
I like Shakur to win the fight.
This is going to sound familiar, but, Oscar Valdez, when he fought Robson Conceição, Robson, who's a pure boxer, jabber, he got off to a very strong start against Oscar, and he was in control of that fight for most of the first half, but he let it get away from him. I don't think that'll happen to Shakur Stevenson, because I view Shakur as being a cut above a Robson Conceição. I feel that base style...
Robson and Shakur are both Olympians.
They're both pure boxers, these kids, but Robson, he's an orthodox fighter, whereas Shakur Stevenson, he's a southpaw, leads with his right hand, sets up his left.
You know how frustrating those southpaws can be.
It is a similar dynamic to what we saw in Valdez versus Conceição, with the difference being that Shakur Stevenson leads with his right hand, thereby creating an even more frustrating situation for Oscar Valdez. Oscar Valdez, who a lot of people thought...
He lost.
He lost that Robson Conceição fight.
I felt Robson gave away too many rounds in the second half.
I felt that he got off to a very strong start, taking it to the champion, but spent far too much time circling away on his back foot in the second half of the fight. That's how I felt about that. Though at minimum, you have to say that Robson's base style, it did give Oscar Valdez problems, and I feel that Shakur Stevenson has some similarities to a Robson Conceição, but he's a better fighter than Robson Conceição.
Robson gave you problems. Shakur's going to give you that many more problems.
Because he's a pure boxer the same way that Robson is a pure boxer, but he's a southpaw, and he's a lot faster than Robson Conceição, a lot faster than Oscar Valdez.
Fast enough to jab your head off and fast enough to counter.
Oscar, he lives somewhere between a boxer puncher and a pressure fighter. Depends on who's opposite the ring. It depends on the situation. Did a lot of boxing against Miguel Berchelt, using angles, counter shots, and movement. Miguel Berchelt is, and according to Hoyle, mid-range to inside pressure fighter.
Pressure fighter's weakness is a boxer puncher.
And a boxer puncher's weakness is a pure boxer. A pure boxer's economic, defensively minded kind of style doesn't do a boxer puncher very many favors, because they aren't affording you that many openings. And I think the edge in power and experience has to go to Oscar Valdez, though I reiterate, Shakur Stevenson's base style, it just don't do Oscar's base style any fucking favors.
And I like Shakur to win the fight, and I like him to win the fight on points.
The winner of this fight, whoever it is, whether it's Oscar or Shakur, will enter into that pound-for-pound conversation, that pound-for-pound queue, alongside Stephen Fulton, who took on two unbeaten champions last year in the super bantamweight division and became its only other unified champion alongside MJ Akhmadaliev. That's right. The winner of this fight will be a unified champion the same as those fighters are.
There's a lot of unified champions right now.
Not even including the winner of this fight between Oscar and Shakur, there is Stephen Fulton, who I just mentioned, MJ Akhmadaliev, Artur Beterbiev, Errol Spence Jr.
I should say the winner of Spence versus Ugas.
And don't forget, the winner of Jermel Charlo versus Brian Castano, too. The winner of that fight will be that division's undisputed champion. Undisputed at 154 pounds. The pound-for-pound queue, as it were, is filling up with names, filling up with potential candidates to grace the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, and it might come down to style points for some of these guys, since some of them are already unified champions.
I didn't think this fight was going to happen.
Based on rumors months ago that Oscar Valdez was looking to fight Emmanuel Navarrete, there was a feeling that Oscar just didn't fancy this fight, fancy a fight with any fighter like a Shakur Stevenson. And what I mean by that is, before Shakur Stevenson got the fight, Jamel Herring wanted it back when Jamel was the reigning WBO champion. And Jamel, like Shakur, he's a bit of a pure boxer too, a stick-and-move guy, a jabber. And, Oscar didn't seem too enthusiastic about that fight. I mean, I don't know what effort did or didn't go into trying to make a fight like that, but in the end, it didn't happen, did it? What we were hearing
was Valdez is going to fight Navarrete.
I'm glad that Oscar Valdez has once again proven me wrong, that he's decided to take on this fight in spite of my assumptions. And
this is a good fight.
Well, it's not just a good fight. It's a great fight. The classic matchup, the classic style matchup between the boxer, Shakur Stevenson being the boxer, and Oscar Valdez being the puncher. I'm looking forward to it if they can get it over the line. Now we come to our weekend recap of Joe Smith Jr. versus Steve Goff, a WBO light heavyweight contest for what was Joe Smith Jr.'s WBO title that he's still in possession of because Steve fell short. Steve, a late replacement opponent for Callum Johnson of the United Kingdom. It's admirable that Steve Goff decided to take this fight on short notice given what was in front of him, though inside the squared circle, he just wasn't ready for it. Coming forward in that high guard, allowing Joe Smith Jr. to tee off.
You're not giving him much to think about.
Steve Goff might have made it hard for Joe to land big shots and clean shots by shelling up the way that he did behind that high guard. But in doing so,
he made it hard for Joe to land clean shots early.
But because he wasn't catching and shooting and countering Joe Smith Jr., he allowed Joe to build confidence. He allowed Joe to put more punches together.
He allowed him to find ways around the guard.
Because there wasn't much coming back at him. Steve wasn't giving Joe very much to think about whenever Joe did decide to let his hands go. I heard throughout the broadcast, Steve Goff, when he returned to his corner after the mid-rounds, that his shoulder was hurt, something was wrong with his arm.
This is what he said to Steve Cunningham, his trainer.
I wasn't surprised to hear it because you've been letting Joe Smith Jr. batter your shoulders, batter your arms. That's where you've been absorbing the punishment. You made it hard for Joe to land clean headshots and clean body shots, but your arms are paying the price.
And I'm no armchair critic, it just is what it is.
Because things happen the way they happen, because Steve Goff wasn't showing much in terms of offense to render Joe gun-shy, give Joe something to think about before he lets his hands go. Because Steve wasn't throwing all that much, it just allowed Joe to throw that much more. It was outworked and overpowered in 9 rounds.
Joe Smith Jr. addressed the possibility of a Canelo Alvarez fight.
And it was a slightly different tune than what we had been hearing leading up to this fight with Steve Goff, where before Joe was saying that he would prefer to unify with Artur Beterbiev or avenge the loss to Dimitri Bivol. Now he's open to a Canelo Alvarez fight. You got the sense that that's the fight that he wants if he can have it. And I reiterate, that comes as a surprise to no one, because while a Beterbiev fight is a great fight, and a Bivol rematch, that's a good fight too, those fights don't get you the kind of payday that a Canelo Alvarez fight gets you. And this is prize fighting after all, so there is some emphasis for the fighters on the prizes.
Yeah, I still don't know if he's going to get that fight.
We've been hearing mixed reports all fucking weekend about who it is that Canelo Alvarez is going to face next. We heard a report that it might be someone that boxing purists aren't too happy with, which then became the opposite. Then it became someone that boxing purists might actually want to see Canelo Alvarez fight. These fucking riddles!
It's like an episode of Batman and Robin.
You guys remember Adam West. I will say that Canelo Alvarez versus Joe Smith Jr., it's a good fight. It is an intriguing fight. You have to wonder if Canelo Alvarez's angling and counter punches, his clean counters, would that be enough to stop Joe Smith Jr., or at minimum, when Canelo Alvarez appoints decision? There are those things to consider. But if by some chance he doesn't fight Joe Smith Jr. next, I'm okay with that too, because that opens the door for Smith versus Beterbiev. That opens the door for Smith versus Yarde. If the Beterbiev fight can't happen, Anthony Yarde, who...
If a Beterbiev unification match don't happen, Anthony Yarde's gonna push for a title shot.
Joe Smith Jr. versus Anthony Yarde doesn't get talked about as much because Joe's name is tacked onto a Canelo Alvarez fight and a Beterbiev unification match, but I like a Smith versus Yarde fight just as much as I like those fights. Anthony Yarde is a little bit more slick than Joe Smith Jr. He's a mid-range to inside guy that likes to roll punches off the shoulder, crowd a guy to land big shots.
He's a big puncher like Joe's a big puncher.
Joe Smith Jr. has comparatively faced better quality of competition. He's pulled 4 upsets in his career, been the underdog 4 times, and beat the odds 4 times. So you might want to give Joe the edge. But in a situation where both guys have their drawbacks, both guys have their flaws, their own flaws, and both guys are punchers, big ones, anything can happen.
Because Joe's shots are so wide.
I mean, Joe's got a great chin, great resume, great power, great right hand, straight right hand.
Anthony Yarde isn't as straightforward as Joe is, though, is he?
He does have a little bit more nuance than Joe, some subtleties. It's a very, very interesting fight. Doesn't get talked about as much as the Beterbiev fight because, let's be honest, we do want to see alphabet titles consolidated. You think about a Beterbiev fight, I've seen a lot of guys try to box Artur Beterbiev. Alexander Vozdik, more recently, Marcus Brown. That doesn't seem to work.
So maybe what it's gonna take is for a guy to take it to him.
Don't shy away from his power. Punch with him, because you stand a better chance of landing big, landing hard, if you do that instead of circling away, trying to maintain distance.
Joe ain't no finesse fighting kind of fighter.
His out, that Artur Beterbiev fight, is that he's not a finesse fighting kind of guy. He's got his own punching power, his own imposing size and will. Joe Smith Jr. has beat the odds before, 4 times by my count. Could he beat the odds again against Artur Beterbiev? Because he's not that finesse fighting fleet of foot guy that's going to try to maintain distance and jab Artur's head off. Is Joe Smith Jr.'s more straightforward approach the key to beating Artur Beterbiev? It's an intriguing fight in and of itself. Artur's
not invincible. He's been dropped 2 times.
He can be caught, but it's that much harder to catch him when you're moving away, when you're making yourself a moving target. Could a Joe Smith Jr.
Could a straightforward approach be the difference?
Well, I don't know. I look forward to finding out, and that's if Canelo Alvarez doesn't pick him, if Canelo doesn't fight Joe, and he doesn't fight Artur, and he doesn't fight, one of those guys. No, I'm not against Joe getting the Canelo Alvarez fight, but if he doesn't, there are some very good alternatives out there for him.
We'll see what happens.